Good evening, everyone. So it's good to hear that there's a live stream here. A friend of mine said he was going to sign up to Music Tank just so he could listen to the stream. So it just shows streaming does pay. So what I want to start with is looking at really what we do when we don't know about streaming, because there's a lot of talk about people assuming that it cannibalizes sales, it doesn't cannibalize sales, it's a discovery vehicle, there's enough room in the market, there's not enough room in the market, and a huge amount of this comes down to what we actually know. I think I'll start by saying, let's not get hung up on streaming at all, because streaming is not some sort of paradigm shift in user behavior. You know, it's just a delivery mechanism for music, you know, and ultimately, how different is a cache stream from an MP3 file? Not a lot, to be honest. It's just how long it actually stays on your device. You know, if you think about the difference between a CD and a cassette, or between a CD and anything digital, they're the differences. The difference between a download and a stream is not a lot. You know, I think ultimately we'll look back in 5 years' time and this whole discussion about streaming versus downloading will just look a bit sort of old-fashioned. So what we know that streaming is pretty popular, admittedly small numbers, but it has been around for ages. You know, Napster, Rhapsody, and a whole host of other services, and including many which aren't around anymore. What has happened is Spotify, more than anybody else at this stage, has pushed it through somewhere close to the edge of the mainstream, you know, and that's at least in awareness terms. We do know that artists aren't that comfortable, and I'll come on to this in a bit, but there's definitely a lot of confusion about just how much artists get paid, which comes down to what artists' expectations are. We know that scale is really important. We don't know yet whether streaming cannibalizes sales, and I don't care what data set you put in front of me. There is simply not enough empirical evidence yet to draw any firm conclusions about whether streaming is cannibalizing sales. We don't even know, really, the true relationship between downloads and CDs yet. We probably need another couple of years to make that, let alone between streaming and CDs and downloads. What we suspect that consumers may well buy less music if they pay for a streaming subscription. That doesn't mean they'll spend less, it just means that they'll probably buy less music if they're paying $9.99. Again, we suspect it, there isn't enough hard data yet. We think that it probably helps drive down piracy a bit. I don't think there's any strong evidence to show that the absolute number of file sharers goes down, but there is some decent evidence to suggest that the amount that file sharers download is beginning to decrease. But again, we don't know, we suspect this. Smaller labels and smaller artists don't seem to benefit that well. Streaming seems to really cater for scale and mainstream hits. Again, we suspect. So, putting streaming in a bigger context, there's been a lot of talk about the shift from access to ownership, from ownership to access. That's just one part of a much broader transition in media consumption. This transition is a change in concepts about ownership, about how we access, how we interact. In the distribution era of the physical age, what we leant back to enjoy physical formats of linearly programmed content. In the digital age, we lean forward, we interact, and we value access more. Streaming is one part of this transition. And the transition is important. Unfortunately, all of my builds and my clever builds are just disappearing on this. So I was going to build up to this. The picture is that downloads in particular and streaming to some degree are transition technologies. Because whenever something new comes into the market, it looks more like what came before than what is going to come. Because our reference point is what is around today, however forward-looking we are. You look at the evolution of the car, the first picture is of a horse-drawn carriage, the trap, the second is a steam-powered car, and the third is the first mass-produced car. You see the evolution there. The first steam-powered car looked pretty much like a horse and cart without the horse. You know, and it wasn't really till we got to the 50s where the aerodynamics of real, automobiles started to appear. The same is true of digital music. We're so early on, we can't pretend that we're talking about answers yet. We're talking about transition technologies. And in many ways, streaming type services that happen to use streaming rather than because they're streaming, are the first of the real sort of true for the digital age services. A download is just really a CD with a twist. It's an item which you own and you buy in units. It doesn't play to the strength of digital in any sense. Now here's some data. Again, I was going to build up with a nice build. Pretend the pink number isn't there for a moment. These are some numbers which some record labels provided to Music Tank, which we've put together here to show the amount of income that goes to a label and the amount of income that goes to an artist from different revenue streams. So this is all based off an index of where a download equals 1 and everything else is a multiple thereof. So a free stream takes about 200 free streams, give or take, to generate the same amount of income for a record label for one download. According to the record label data, it's around about 120 or so for an artist. Did a lot of digging around and looking at some artists and taking an average from the artists are reporting that it's closer to about 200, 250. Some as high as 2,000. Now, why can there be so much difference? Because of the natures of the deals that artists are struck with labels, as well as all the various intermediaries which are often involved with artists who take money out as well. But this is a crucially important point, because it's those really high numbers, like the 2,000 that Project Records reported, are the ones which shape the debate. The market isn't just about 2,000s. There's a massive disparity in the amount that artists get paid from streaming services, and this is a case, in my view, for a real need. The transparency argument is as much about labels and artists getting to understand each other's businesses more. But the final piece of context here is it takes 5,500 listeners to a song on Radio 1 to generate the same amount of income for a download. And that's important because the comparison is typically between a stream and a download. But there's an equally strong argument to compare it to radio. The fact is that streaming is somewhere in the middle. We don't know yet, because artists are getting used to it, labels are getting used to it, consumers are getting used to it. We will find where streaming sits within, I would say, within the next couple of years as business models evolve. Here's a few tidbits. I'm moving as swiftly on as I can. Here's a few tidbits from what some of the labels have said about streaming and how they see it with regards to their business. We're seeing that markets with strong streaming also tend to have stronger overall digital growth. Now, there's a slight confusion of cause and effect here, because often we see stronger streaming in markets which are already more mature digitally, but nonetheless, there is an observed correlation. Streaming is growing more quickly than downloads. It's great, but unfortunately, it's as much of a reflection on the fact that downloads are growing nowhere as quickly as they should be. Streaming, for some artists in some markets, you'll notice the heavily nuanced and caveated language here, but nonetheless, streaming for some artists in some markets can be up to 50% of their income. Streaming consumers and download buyers do not overlap that much. And finally, streaming subscriber ARPU is often higher than download buyer ARPU. So it's probably not a massive amount they didn't already know, but what it shows us is that streaming certainly correlates with some of the more important digital music customers in the marketplace. There's some data here from Spotify showing an interesting trend that when an album was released by an artist, I know the font's a bit too small to see here, but bear with me. When an album was released by an artist, released to Spotify the same time as it was released to CD and to download, we saw a very strong spike in listening and then a strong continued higher water level mark, essentially, where what you're seeing is that the catalogue is accessed more widely following the release of the album on Spotify. Now, you can interpret this both ways. You can interpret this and say, okay, so it's not cannibalizing. People are consuming loads of music when it's there on Spotify. Here's a case for releasing it straight away to streaming services. You could also say, how many of those streams have translated into albums and downloads which weren't bought? Either way, the only thing we can conclusively say is that there is a correlation in listener behavior with Spotify as in all of the media. So, what should we compare streaming to? It's not a download, it's not radio, it's somewhere between the two divided by something. And I'm hoping that we can get somewhere towards answering what we think that might look like during the debate. Final element I want to touch upon, which is something which at the moment is predominantly Spotify specific. I don't think many people yet really quite realize how important Spotify's API, developer API, could prove to be. So this is where Spotify are opening up their access to, essentially, they're behaving like a builder's merchant. They're allowing everybody to come in and use their licensed music to go and build apps around. Now, one of the things which Spotify is fantastic at many things, one of the things Spotify hasn't done much of is delivering rich, immersive discovery experiences. This is an opportunity for the third-party developers to really start plugging that gap. Now, if Spotify goes to scale in the way that Tim was talking about and really becomes something close to a mass market value proposition with hundreds of millions of people using it across multiple territories, then Spotify could end up becoming an API for music effectively, where in the same way that people buy into apps in the iPhone store, people buy their music apps within Spotify. And of course, in the same way that there's space for more than one operating system in the mobile space, so there will be more than one opportunity for API operating systems, if you like, for music. So I think what we could end up with, if streaming services open up their licenses effectively to third parties to develop on, then we can end up with moving the debate way beyond whether streaming is cannibalizing music to what is this next generation of music experiences that are going to exist around streaming. So to finish, it's too early to make any conclusive judgments. Long-term music consumption is going to shift towards access, no doubt about that. That's not going to happen in the next 2 years, probably not even the next 5 years. It's a long, slow process of which current streaming services are one small part. The streaming debate is clouded by conflicted statistics from artists because they might be on points, they might be on percentage, they might be recouped, they might not, they might have struck a deal directly with an aggregator, etc. So this is one of the things that needs to be cleared up is artists need to be sold the story better from record labels. They need to understand what they should be expecting streaming to be doing as part of their overall revenue mix and what it should be doing for the rest of their artist business as a promotional vehicle. And then finally, streaming is neither radio replacement nor a download replacement. It has some of the best of both, and given a fair wind, will become better than both. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mark.